Hi guys, and welcome to another vidcast. It's been a few weeks, but we are back. How are you, Miles and Henry?
Very well, mate. How are you?
Yeah, all good, I think.
Yeah, you're looking very colourful today. I've just noticed the array of different shirts and colours, more than I've noticed before.
It's quite nice, actually.
Guys, my question is, who had a good weekend? I suspect one of you had a pretty poor day yesterday.
Well, it wasn't me. So,
dear. Yeah.
Miles, should we get that out of the way?
I think we should very quickly skim over United's performance. We said, didn't we, before we came on, that if I sort of paraded around the office in the manner that Paul Pogba did at Old Trafford yesterday, I'd expect a performance review probably. So not good. Head in hands yesterday afternoon.
It's just I started my weekend with it like this and ended it kind of like
moving it round.
Yeah, I would have not taken it and thrown it somewhere. But obviously, I mean, Arsenal. I mean, we've got Man United, Crystal Palace, and Arsenal here. We were the only team to win, so that's,
you're
anyway.
pretty good. Yeah.
Well, I am actually. I am. So as most people will see, we have Ian Marchant with us, chairman of Thames Water, and was also interim executive for most of the last sort of year to 18 months. So we're going to kind of dive into that a little bit. So Ian, thank you for joining us and giving up some of your time this afternoon. 2020 has been one of the most strangest years for everyone with the pandemic.
Yeah.
How's it been for you, not only professionally, but also personally?
Well, yeah, it has been strange. Up until the pandemic, myself and my wife, were sort of leading a split existence. We were going up to Scotland once a month, which is where the family home was and where our daughter still lives, and into London a lot, and also Reading, and then down in our house. Since lockdown, we've been in the same house together for 7 months, and amazingly, last weekend we celebrated our 34th wedding anniversary.
Oh wow!
I mean, that's the best.
She hasn't killed me yet. So it's been different because I've never been in one place for as long, for 20, 30 years. So that's been a bit different, and it's taken some getting used to.
I bet she didn't know what to do with you, having you around so often.
To be honest, she was actually very grateful for the Thames job because it kept me busy and gave me a focus and things. So yeah, it's been different. It's been different. As many of you will know, I have a disability. I struggle to walk. So actually, again, the lockdown's been good because I've been able to do my jobs from here. The commute is 5 meters. That's pretty good. At the end of the day, I go downstairs. That's it. That's the only. And I've got a lift, so it's been pretty. In that sense, personally, it's actually been pretty good. But I'm sure, like you guys, I've had the odd bad day. We were just talking about it with a friend yesterday, and you all have odd bad days. Fortunately, myself and my wife's bad days have not coincided. But I just think we all need to be aware of that we, the people we're close to, our colleagues, will have the odd bad day, just because life is so different. So generally, it's been pretty good.
I feel like a lot of people just currently are feeling that maybe a double dip, perhaps, because the weather's changing, the nights are closing in, and it looks like it's going to be a pretty crappy few months ahead, doesn't it, for a lot of us? So that, like you say, I think people have had oscillations throughout this. Maybe right at the start, those with kids and getting used to teaching from home, that was a really big challenge, and then maybe a different sort of stages.
Yes,
I feel like.
Well,
currently,
someone else was saying to me that when the first lockdown happened, you were told you could go out for an hour a day, so they were religiously every day spending at least 45 minutes out exercising.
Yeah,
and actually they'd lost that habit, and it was a good habit, and they need to get back in it. Just so I think it's about finding habits that work in this environment, and the nice thing about lockdown is that you know, that the standard greeting, how are you? How are you? And we never listened to the answer. At the beginning of lockdown, everybody meant it. They were genuinely asking, how are you? And actually, if we can keep that human connection going, even at the start of a Teams meeting, genuinely, how are you? I think that will help us all.
Yeah.
The topic of kind of what happens next is quite interesting, right? And if you believe sort of polling, which always sort of take with a pinch of salt, but like you say, Henry, there was kind of this very sort of everybody's happy to work from home. And then it kind of got to about 6 months in and everybody went, oh, actually, I'd quite like to go back to the office. And then the cases rise and everybody thinks, oh, actually, I might just sort of stay at home. I mean, Ian, it's interesting because I suppose you've spent a lot of your career in a traditional corporate environment, right? In an office, you know, and what do you think sort of happens from here? Do you think that the way that people work will change forever? Or do you think that very sort of human instinct of kind of reverting to type and what we kind of always known will sort of come back into play and we'll just go back to the way things were?
Well, I've got two comments. You know, Time Magazine have a word of the year.
Yeah.
This year is going to be COVID or coronavirus or lockdown. I think next year might be hybrid. I think the way we will all work will be different. And that hybrid, because actually some of what we do now is actually more productive on Teams and it cuts the commuting out. But some of it isn't. Some of that human interaction, some of those sort of brainstorming, team building, all those sorts of things. So I think we will settle into a hybrid world. That's the first comment. The second comment I'd make is you look back over the last 100 or 150 years, big crises that affect the whole of society, and typically the two world wars are the examples. And COVID is similar. It affects everybody. They are followed by a period of enormous social dislocation and transformation. Particularly, say, the Second World War, you know, we got the nationalisation, the formation of the NHS, stuff happened in those 5 years. I think when we're out of this virus, which is probably another year or so away, I think things will change dramatically. What I can't predict is what those changes will be, but I think the nature of work will be one of them. And we will, you know, we will be working from home, and we will be getting much more used to chatting to people in their bedroom, looking at their Arsenal shirts behind them, or whatever it happens to be, and trying to work out what you can see, you know, reading people's books on their shelves behind them and things.
Yeah. And then from a sort of professional point of view, obviously, you know, Sarah's come in now, but for most of the year, you've obviously been kind of heading up the company. How's that been? And how did the pandemic sort of change the way you were kind of working and your thoughts even?
Well, firstly, the role of executive chairman, which is unusual. Most companies don't. I'd never done it. I'd actually never seen it done. So it is different than being, I regarded it as different than being the CEO. So it was a bit more remote because I wasn't full time. And when the pandemic hit, I was basically faced with a choice. Did I almost step in to be the CEO, or did I almost step back and say, guys, get on with it? I chose the guys, get on with it. So I never attended any of the Gold Command meetings. And I think you'd find a CEO, if they weren't Gold Commander, would have been in the meetings. Now, I left that to Steve and left it to John. The impact I was in that first week saying to Steve Spencer, this is going to go on for a long time. Think about a deputy. Think about rotation. Didn't say who that should be. So it was much more stand back and listen to what's happening and just give the odd bit of advice. That's different than what a CEO would do. So, but also I also found it easier then to lean in on other issues, spend time with people, because Teams is easy. They did a, when are you next in Reading? Can I have half an hour for your slot? I actually put more time in to Thames, but not at the sort of, not in the CEO style, getting involved in individual issues. So it's an odd role, and then stepping out from a role that you've never seen done before is also, you know, and creating the space for Sarah to to take on this. So the first thing that she and I agreed is that for the first 3 weeks, I would stay in the role of exec chairman, and that she would get out and about because she's passionate about the front line. And you've seen, it's where's Sarah now game, which site is she on now? Who knows where she is today, but it'll be somewhere different, I'm sure. But I wanted to give her the space to do that. So now it's the case of I'm stepping back and I'm really there for her as to what advice and help she wants to be. So I'm trying to get back into that non-exec.
Yeah. And on a personal level, sort of that transition back and forth, like, are you enjoying that? Have you found that difficult? Because it's like letting go of a child or a baby, isn't it? You sort of, know everything now. You know where all the skeletons are and all the issues and stuff. You'll never not know what you know.
Yeah, and it is a challenge. And but the first thing is that Sarah and I have been very honest about that. We both recognise. And so, as you're probably aware, every Monday morning, well, at 12 o'clock, we have a call with all the key operational leads. What happened last week? What's happening this week? What's going on? So the first one of those without me was last Monday. I got a very nice WhatsApp from Sarah with a screenshot of everybody, sort of waving or whatever. And I replied saying, I'd missed it because I was watching Loose Women on the television, which of course wasn't entirely true. But I did know it was happening. Whereas this week, I was on a call on one of my other companies and actually hadn't really noticed. So yeah, there is a bit of withdrawal symptoms. But I'm still non-exec chairman. I will be still talking to Sarah every week. There are 2 or 3 areas that I'm going to stay a bit more involved in. The energy agenda for Thames. Obviously, as you know, that's my background. So I've said, look, Sarah, I can help you more there. I'm always interested in the whole innovation area, digital engineering. So there's some areas where I can stay a bit more involved.
Was there ever a point, Ian, where you thought to yourself, I'd quite like to do this role, whether sort of CEO or otherwise? Was there ever a conversation, or did you ever think to yourself, because obviously you've done a CEO role before at a utility, and so you had that kind of in your back pocket. Did you ever sort of were you ever tempted? I
was never tempted to step back and be a CEO. There was a point earlier this year where we got close with someone and it all fell apart. That's public knowledge.
Yeah.
There was a point where I did think to myself, could I carry on being exec chairman for a longer period and sort of call a halt to the recruitment and just carry on in that role? And that feeling lasted for about 7 minutes, I think. I realised it was not a good idea and I need to get back. But just in terms of thinking what the options were at that point. So basically no.
Yeah.
Because it's 7 years ago since I stopped being a CEO, and I stopped being a CEO because I wanted to stop and do different things.
Yeah.
And you should never go back, generally.
Yeah.
I mean, 7 minutes is quite a long time. I mean, Man United conceded 3 in 7 minutes yesterday. Shame it was Spurs scoring the goals.
Yeah.
Ian, what is leadership to you? What qualities does a good leader have?
Well,
A big question.
I do some speaking on MBAs. I'm a visiting professor at a couple of business schools, and leadership is one of those things that you can spend weeks studying, and people on an MBA do, but I get an hour, and I basically talk about four things. Four things. The first is the leader sets a strategy, but his strategy is, the big vision stuff. Where are we going? And set the priorities. If you think from a Thames point of view, the first thing I could see was I needed to set what the priorities were. And that's where the fish finger sandwich came out. What are the priorities? That's the first thing. The strategy, where are we heading? What are our priorities? The second thing a leader has to be is a communicator. And leaders have to communicate to a variety of audiences. They can be a town hall meeting. They can be a one-to-one, groups of different audiences. So the leader needs to be able to communicate through a variety of different mediums. I had never done a virtual town hall meeting. I used to do physical town hall meetings, but never done one. And on that first day, the challenge was, how do we communicate to as many of the 6,500 people in Thames about quite a sudden change? So the idea of doing a live event, as we now know them, came about from a couple of people in the comms teams and the digital team saying, well, let's give it a go. And I was up for that because a leader needs to be communicating. So that's the second thing. The third feature is one of the best business books I've read is Good to Great by Jim Collins. And he talks about a level 5 leader. Level 1 is a performing individual. You go up. Level 4 is a functioning leader. A level 5 leader is the person who puts the organisation ahead of themselves. It's not about you. It's about other people. It's about the organisation. And actually, the objective of a level 5 leader is to leave the organisation in a better place than you found it. And that's almost like a personal value set. And the final thing is teamwork. Businesses and life is complicated. We don't have the individual skills. You need a team. And that was one of the really early messages that I gave to the exec at Thames. You're not a team. You're sometimes you're playing with each other, sometimes you're playing against each other. Sometimes you're like primary school football children all running after the ball. A variety of different analogies. And the leader is the manager captain. And the key thing that you do is pick the right players. And then the second thing is you create the environment in which they do their best. You can't decide who's going to whether it's going to be a long corner or a short corner. The players will pitch to that, but you create the environment in which they make better decisions. So those are the 4 themes that I talk about as leader. There are lots of others, but those are the things that help me think about what the nature of a leader is.
Is there anybody over the course of your career, Ian, I'm sure there is, that you've looked to in that kind of respect? You've seen it demonstrated in a certain way and you've thought, I'm going to go for that, or I'm going to base myself on kind of the skills and the qualities that person's got?
It's not as simple as that, because in the course of my career, I had a number of bosses and leaders, and some of the lessons I learned were negative.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do it like that.
Yeah.
Or I couldn't do it like that. Because I have to be authentic to myself.
Yeah.
So I learned from a number of people, going right back to a teenager, and so it's an amalgam of people and things. It's not like there's one role model, but it's a variety. And say sometimes negative and sometimes positive lessons.
That's I found that it's really interesting to sort of hear from someone with your wealth of experience. And that, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of all of the other kind of positions that you hold elsewhere, and I mean, maybe for those that don't know, you hold a number of kind of board memberships of lots of different things, where I can imagine you channeling that type of leadership. Do you want to tell us? I don't know how you do it all, to be honest. I don't know how you balance all of those commitments.
Well, one of the things that happens when you become a CEO is that you get very used to being able to jump from one thing to the other. Because when I was at SSE, at 1 minute you're talking about the network, quite similar to, say, Walter under Danny or Matt in ways. Then you're going to generation, then trading, then customer service, then you're dealing with a politician, a regulator, then an HR issue. You get used to jumping around. And actually in the portfolio world, that I just have to jump between organizations. And I've already today had, I think this is my 4th event, if you like, today, and for the 4th different organization. And you just get used to it. And it's like, I think I'm like a computer. I open files up, mainly as you close them down, you move on. actually, the other thing that really does help is I couldn't do what I do now in a non-digital age. I'm very dependent upon email. I have 3 different email accounts from about 30 organisations in a variety of ways, shapes, and forms. And actually, the whole Teams thing has helped there. But all of the roles were non-exec, and the difference between an executive and being a non-exec, the simplest analogy I can give you guys, is the difference between being a parent and a grandparent. For a parent, you can have far more grandchildren than you can children, and grandparents give kids back at the end of the day. And it's a bit the same as a non-exec. You step away from it, and actually, in the last year or so, I've had to cut the number of things down because I had a child, Thames.
Yeah.
And therefore I was more invested in it, not just in time, but emotionally. Therefore, I'm now starting to think, mate, I can do 1 or 2 other things.
Yeah.
So that's not a complete answer, but you sort of get used to it.
Yeah.
And now I actually struggle with the opposite.
Oh, really?
Doing one thing for a whole day. Hang on a minute.
Avoid that. What you've described, you see that, don't you? I'm sure we all have with senior leaders and capable, whatever, being able to dip in and out. That must be one of the key things. But I think to do it with authenticity as well, so you can still switch from your hard engineering, your HR, whatever, but then like this, sit and have a conversation with someone on a personal level. And
I think there are a couple of things that you have to have, I think. And there's an interest in people, so you engage with whoever it is. And something again I had to learn as a CEO, that everybody who came into my office, it was really important to them. It was just one of many for me, and I had to remember. Put myself in their shoes to remember.
They might have been prepping for a month for that.
It might have been the most important meeting they're having that week, and it was one of 20 you're having in a day. And just remembering to be present with the people. That's the first thing. And second, just be curious, be interested. One of the things that, in fact, how we first met was I did these TWED talks, where people would come in and spend 15 to 20 minutes talking about the bit they did for Thames or something they had done. I love those because I was curious. I was learning, interesting, and I could go from social media to the Greenwich pen stock replacement, and they were completely, almost the complete opposite ends of heavy engineering to social media. But I found them both fascinating because I'm just curious, and that's what I've enjoyed about getting involved with Thames, finding out about a new industry. So if you've got that, you're interested in people and you're interested in learning, then it's quite easy to be authentic because you are genuinely interested.
Yeah.
So what's kind of the plan for you now? I mean, you've as you said, you've handed back the baby, you've the child, Thames. You've got a few grandkids, which is great. Yeah. But I mean, have you achieved everything you want to achieve in your career, or is there still something else to achieve?
Done.
It's interesting. I'm going to slightly go off at a tangent then come back to what you said. Is that one bit of advice that I give, sort of typically sort of early 20s, people maybe just finishing university or doing their MBA, is make sure it's your voice in your head, not your parents. And for guys, it's your mother. It's your mother saying, you could do this, you could do that. When you get to your 20s, you should be driving it. So set your own goals, not try and achieve what you think other people, what you think they think, but your own thoughts. It's a slight tangent. I just want to do things that are interesting. Back to my 2 things. I want to be with interesting people and things that make me curious and make me learn. So as I'm looking to take on 1 or 2 other non-exec roles, I'd like to do something that's not for profit, whether it's a charity or a think tank or something, and maybe one other commercial organisation. So I've got a nice rounded portfolio, because that's one of the other joys when you learn something from one company that you can take to another. You can make connections. So I'm just looking to add, because I did have another big chairmanship, the Wood Group up in Aberdeen, that finished last August. I hadn't replaced it because of the, stepping into parenthood. So I now feel I can take something on.
And at this point in your career, Ian, with all your sort of expertise and your contacts, how does that kind of happen now? Do people come to you and they say, look, we've got this opportunity and we think you're the right guy to do it? Are you still sort of looking around, seeing what's out there and kind of making an approach?
Generally, I'm in the fortunate position things come to me. A headhunt. They don't quite come and say, but they say, we think this is a job you would be interested in. And that's exactly what happened with Thames.
Yeah.
Actually, the day before the headhunter called, I was having a coffee in London with an investment banker who said that he'd heard that the Thames chairmanship was being looked at, and he thought it's something that I would be interested in. And I was pretty dismissive. He said, Ian, I've known you for long enough. Just do me a favour. If they call you, take it seriously. And they called me the next day. So generally, I will get the approaches typically from headhunters, and you just, some straight away, just not interested, and some you explore a bit and then declare, and some you let run. So it's because I'm in that very fortunate position, and I am very grateful that I don't have to take on anything.
Yeah.
So I can be quite discerning.
Question is, are you still talking to the guy that put you in suggestion?
Well, actually, I have pinged him a couple of times. But the headhunter who ran the process is the one that we used to repopulate the board, bring us on, and actually the same firm ran the search for Sarah. As it happened, yes.
Yeah. And from your career, Ian, I mean, in sort of a long career like yours, you'll have highs, you'll have lows.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be from Thames, but is there any particular highs you can remember or lows? And how did you kind of, if there were a low, how did you recover from them?
Well, a low was the regulatory investigation at SSE that happened just towards the end of my time. That was a really, really tough day. And actually, it was the support of colleagues who were actually friends, had become friends, that got me through that. The other bad days, and I've mentioned this on a couple of the live events, are those days when someone gets seriously hurt or killed during your leadership. And those are the calls that you dread. I know a number of you who are watching this will know Carl. I always dreaded Carl reaching out to speak to me. It wasn't because it was Carl. It was because of he's calling me because there's something has happened. A safety manager never phones you and says, just to let you know, nothing's happened today. So those were bad days. There were the good days were generally when you saw people achieving things that they didn't think were possible. And I took pride, particularly when it was a team, that you could say that team that I helped put together have achieved something that they didn't think was possible. Leakage in a Thames environment, achieving the leakage targets was as an example of that, and there were experiences at SSE that the same, and then there were sort of odd days. I remember, you remember the Inconvenient Truth, the climate change film.
Yeah.
Well, Al Gore, who was just recently the Vice President of America, came over to give that lecture in Glasgow, and for some reason, I was invited out for dinner afterwards, and there was a small group of us sitting in a curry house in Glasgow, me talking to the ex-Vice President of the US. So it shouldn't happen. So you do get these slightly surreal things. Going into 10 Downing Street, I can still remember, I was actually a finance director that first time you walk in through the door at Downing Street and you sort of pinch it. How has this happened? And you walk up the stairs with all the photographs of the prime ministers that you've seen, if you remember in Love Actually, as you've gone.
Oh yeah.
It's real, and just that. So there were some pinch yourself moments, as well as the really rewarding times.
Yeah, we've got a few minutes left. I'll come, Miles and Henry, back to you for last few questions.
Yeah.
There was one when I sort of, within the team, I did get a few people last week ask where the next vidcast is and who's your next guest. I did tell them. The one question I got,
hundreds of people asking.
Well, of course. But the one question I obviously got from quite a few of them was, ask Ian, did he think of the fish finger sandwich off the cuff, or was it something pre-planned?
No, it's literally what happened about the day or two before the change happened. In fact, after the process had started, I was sitting here at home and thinking, well, I'm going to give a clear message. We need to be the priority.
Yeah.
What are the priorities? I need to say what those priorities are. So I just started scribbling them down and realised that I got 4 or 5. And I said, well, hang on there. I want to make something about the core purpose and wrote that. And then, but the bedrock's the people. And so I wrote this on a piece of paper, which I regret. I scribbled it out. And I then came into the office and sat down with the executive team and shared it and said, it looks a bit like a fish finger sandwich. And that was the thing that stuck. Okay. Now, if you do an MBA, they'll talk about plan on a page.
Yeah.
Quite a common thing. That's what it was, a plan on a page. The fact it became known as a fish finger sandwich was a coincidence. But once we decided on it, you stick with it because it sort of worked. So no, the need to set a clear set of priorities, and broadly, people can only remember a few things. The reason why your credit card number is put into 4 groups of 4 is because we can remember 4 numbers. We can't remember 16 numbers. Why phone numbers were chunked. So what 5 and 2, you've got the structures, you've got a way to remember. So you're trying to make something memorable.
I like it. I mean, it's stuck, hasn't it? And it's done remarkably well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you know that this year's has got something extra.
Oh,
Special sauce.
Special sauce.
Just bear with me. I'll be back in a second.
So you're just going to present an actual, fish finger sandwich that, it's just gone lunchtime, hasn't it?
I'm quite excited.
Now, what I'm getting, this is something the executive team got me to say goodbye.
Okay.
But there are actually 2. Ian's special sauce. For my own fish fingers.
Hard work, Ian. Worth it for that.
So yes. But no, it was an accident. But it's partly coming back to communication. You're trying to think, how do I make this memorable for a whole organisation?
Well, it worked. It definitely worked. It's something.
I was going to ask you like a serious question about green recovery and net zero carbon, but I know time is short. So this other one really leads on in that you love an analogy or a metaphor, and it's all about communicating a complex message simply. So I know Apollo was your sort of big thing for the leakage and fish finger sandwich for the strategic level. The next stage for Thames and Sarah from now on, what movie
I actually think it's. I'm going to go back. It's the same idea. The space program. In 1962, Kennedy, speaking to a group of university students, said, "We choose to go to the moon and bring someone back this decade, not because it's easy, but because it's hard." He set out a big job. And at that point, America hadn't even put a man in space, let alone, so, and then the whole program of Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo was designed with and it took 7 years. And I think that we're sort of like in that stage at Thames. It's not a simple journey. It's a multiple series. There'll be different phases, different aspects, and it required everybody in the program to be working towards a common vision. So I think that's one analogy, if you like. The other thing, just specifically on the net zero, I think that's the wrong ambition for Thames. Our ambition should be beyond net zero, because if London is going to get to net zero, some bits of it are going to have to be beyond, just averages. And Thames has all the hallmarks of an organisation that can be a net carbon contributor because of the estate we have, the assets we have, the ingenuity we have. So actually it's about setting that vision and then a series of individual steps that are all consistent with it.
That's warmed my heart hearing you say that, Ian. That's my area of work, so that's fantastic.
Yes. Well, I'm actually one of the things I did in my previous existence, I set up something called the 2020 group in Scotland. We set that up in 2009 when the debate in Scotland was about, did we go for 34% emissions reductions or 42% by 2020? And we persuaded the government to go for the higher ambition. And the 2020 group was a coalition of businesses trying to do the right thing to achieve that. The interesting thing, it is now 2020 and Scotland has achieved a 50% carbon reduction. So by setting more stretching goals, you achieve better outcomes. And I think we're at that same point. We have to set ourselves that stretching goal.
Yeah, I like that.
Miles, last question from you.
I don't see how I can better that question, to be perfectly honest. I think probably in wrapping it up, just to thank Ian for his time, as he's outlined. We know how busy you are and how much you've got on your plate, and I'm sure on behalf of the three of us, but everybody else that watches this, namely our mothers and maybe a couple of other people, I think some really, really useful insight in there for everybody, which was really, really fascinating. And just thank you for your time, Ian.
Well, and just a couple of things that say in conclusion. Just remember that leadership is a team activity, and you want not good, diverse teams, be inclusive. Everybody's views count. I genuinely believe that the best ideas come from diverse, functioning teams that trust each other. So in your individual areas of the business, other people who are watching, maybe not your mothers, but more generally, do engage each other in the challenges that we face. And remember, ultimately, what matters are our customers. All these great engineering projects we do, it's because we have customers. And ultimately, Thames will be a successful company when our customers are proud of us. And so just remember those couple of things.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end. So Ian, thank you again for your time. I guess best of luck for the next next stage in your career.
Who knows? Yes. And I might well.
I'm
not sure any other organisation will ever accept a fish finger sandwich in their strategy. You never know.
Yeah, absolutely. Cheers, Ian. And
thanks, guys.
See everyone next week.